Thank you for tuning in to the Voice of the Victim podcast. We discuss a lot of sad and potentially triggering things on this show. We try to be as sensitive and cautious as possible, but if you are sensitive to things involving abuse and may be triggered, please think twice before listening to our show.
Welcome to the Voice of the Victim podcast. My name's Ryan.
And I'm Rosie.
How are you doing tonight, Rosie?
I'm okay. We've got some big news going on with family, and my grandfather is having open heart surgery, and that's pretty wild.
Yeah.
So kind of
unexpected.
Very unexpected. Lots of going on.
Yeah.
How are you doing?
I'm doing good. We got a really nice shout out on Instagram.
We did.
From Amanda.
Thank you so much, Amanda.
Yeah, we really appreciate that. So before we start today, we want to mention that we have a new email address specifically for listener stories. And we have a hard time sorting through all the spam on our main email because it's what we use for all of our accounts with different sites, that we need to use. And they all sell our info to spammers. So this email we're not going to use for any other websites. Hopefully it'll stay clean and easy for us to keep track of listener stories.
Right.
Or just listeners in general. You can use this email to get in contact with us so we don't miss it. So if you've ever sent us your story and never heard back from us, first of all, I'm really sorry about that.
Yeah, that would be really sad. I don't think we've done that.
I hope not.
Yeah, I hope not.
But secondly, feel free to send it again, except send it to this new address. It's vovlistenerstories@gmail.com. So pretty easy to remember. And we'll start putting that in our show notes as well. So, as we said last week, John Wayne Gacy was finished with his 10-year prison sentence after just 18 months.
That's right.
Meaning he was a free man by June of 1970. But it didn't take long for him to get up to no good again.
No, it did not. On February 12th, 1971, John was once again charged with a crime. But this time, rather than looking for victims in his inner circle, he was searching out in public. A complaint was filed because John had pulled up to a Greyhound bus terminal in Chicago and allegedly lured a teenage boy to his car, offering to drive him where he needed to go. The boy agreed, but once he was in the car, Gacy allegedly tried to force the boy into sex.
Now, of course, we know Gacy is a monster by this point, and we only use the term allegedly because after the charges, the boy failed to appear in court and the charges were dismissed. But of course, we know now, and spoiler alert, but I think we all know this, at least 6 of Gacy's future murder victims are still unidentified. So sadly, that's a possibility.
Just 4 months later, on June 22nd, 1971, Gacy was arrested yet again with a similar accusation. Another youth complained that Gacy had lured him into the car by flashing what appeared to be a sheriff's badge. Then once the boy was in the car, Gacy forced him to perform oral sex.
So his mode of operations is evolving here. Now he's trying to show some fake authority to get someone to
That's scary.
listen to his threats.
Because we tell our kids to listen to police officers or respect them. So,
well, these days, I don't know. Times have changed since we were kids. Anyway, Gacy was arrested and charged with aggravated sexual battery and reckless conduct. But once again, the charges were dropped because apparently it was discovered that this complainant had tried to blackmail Gacy.
What?
I couldn't find much detail on that. I don't know why that would make these violent sexual charges get dropped.
But he still made a minor perform oral sex on him, so...
Yeah, but I couldn't find much detail on this blackmail thing. I wonder if the kid was worried people wouldn't believe him and was trying to fabricate evidence. I don't know. But either way, he was just a kid. And it's no coincidence that multiple other people have made the same accusation against him at this point.
Right.
But you may be wondering how Gacy is getting off so easy on these charges when he was currently on probationary parole from a 10-year prison sentence. It's a great question. Apparently, the Iowa Parole Board never found out about these incidents from Illinois.
What?
Why he went to prison. And then in October of 1971, Gacy's parole ended and his past criminal record was sealed. So he basically slipped through the legal cracks of the probationary parole.
I don't understand why his criminal record would be sealed. That's so bizarre.
I know. And how it didn't come up when he was arrested these other times. But again, different times, they didn't have the internet, that information didn't travel as quickly.
Well, once his parole was up, he and his mother bought a home in the Chicago area at 8213 West Somerdale Avenue. It was a ranch-style house near the village of Norridge in the Norwood Park Township.
And this is where he committed the atrocities that he's known for. But of course, he was a model citizen within his neighborhood.
Gacy was an active and neighborly member of his community there. He was always known to lend out tools and assistance, helping neighbors keep their sidewalks clear of snow in the winter. Once settled into this new spot, Gacy started his own construction business called Painting, Decorating, and Maintenance Contractors.
Very creative.
Very. And he shortened it to PDM Contractors. Since he was still working as a cook during the day, he worked his construction contracts part-time in the evenings. His business expanded from minor handyman jobs to more complex jobs like remodeling, landscaping, and interior design. Shortly after moving into this new house, in August of 1971, Gacy was engaged to another woman named Carol Hoff, which prompted John's mother to move out of the house.
She was a recently divorced single mother with 2 young daughters, which is terrifying that John would be their stepfather, but at least they're hopefully not what he's interested in.
I feel kind of bad that the mom felt like she had to leave the house. Why couldn't he? Why couldn't he get a new house for this
I don't know
woman?
What went into that decision, but it is kind of weird.
On July 1st, 1972, they officially got married, and Carol moved into the home with her 2 daughters. At some point in 1973, Gacy was able to quit his cook job and start working for his PDM Contractors company full-time. In 1974, they threw a summer block party, which became an annual event attended by up to 400 people. I always thought that those were like in movies.
Like you've never been to one?
Yeah, never been invited.
Sure would like to be invited to that one someday.
Yeah. The Office.
Oh, inside jokes. Sure would like to be a part of one someday. Anyway, sorry. Sometimes it's nice to bring some levity to these weird, sad stories. But anyway, this is one of the scariest parts about John Wayne Gacy, is that he was able to not only blend into his community, but actually stand out as a great neighbor.
Right.
A real wolf in sheep's clothing.
By 1975, PDM Contractors had expanded so much that John was working up to 16 hours a day.
Which I can imagine would lead to burnout pretty quick. But he continued to be part of his community somehow.
In 1975, Gacy was a member of his local Moose Club. And while he was there, he heard about another club he was interested in. It was called the Jolly Joker Clown Club, a collection of local clowns who regularly performed at fundraising events, parades, and entertained children. Again, block parties, I feel like they're only in movies. Literal Jolly Joker Clown Clubs? What are these flyers at the bar? Like, where do you find stuff like this?
Again, a different time.
And John joined this club and created his own character known as Pogo the Clown, or sometimes Patches the Clown.
Yeah, there were 2 different names because he played 2 different characters. Pogo was happy-go-lucky and Patches was more serious. But again, It's so creepy how he was blending into his community like this.
And what's the Moose Club? Are they moose watchers?
I would imagine it's a very northern, Midwestern type of thing. Let me look it up.
Like, do they practice moose calls? Like, what do we do here?
Loyal Order of Moose. It's a fraternity club. I would guess
the Loyal Order of the Moose?
Don't make fun of people.
I'm not. I'm just picturing like a moose with a crown and a throne.
In 1888 in Illinois.
Okay.
Wow. I've just figured it was founded in Canada, but very interesting. Well, I guess it's a good thing you asked questions.
This clown gig was mostly voluntary, and Gacy claimed he did it so he could regress into childhood and make up for the one he wished he had. Oh dear. He was a popular clown in the area, being asked to perform at many parties, political functions, charity events, and children's hospitals.
And of course, this is where he got his moniker as a killer clown that we always hear about.
Political function seems a little on the edge, but interesting.
What do you mean?
Like, in what circumstance would you have a clown at a political event?
Just wait. There's another weird Oh, you mean having a clown there?
Yeah.
Well, I think it's because it was one of his interests. You know, remember he joined the Democratic thing at 18?
Yeah.
And we'll talk about more instances where he was involved in political events.
Okay. On Mother's Day of 1975, after 3 years of marriage, John and Carol were finishing up a romantic encounter, and he randomly decided to tell her that this would be the last time they would ever have sex, officially coming out to her as bisexual. Well, that's bizarre.
Yeah.
Right after they had sex, he told her that was it.
How would that make you feel? Terrible.
Yeah, like...
It doesn't make sense that he would say bisexual, because why would he stop having sex with her if he was into both men and women? But anyway, obviously that's a horrible thing to say to your wife. I would imagine it would destroy your confidence if I said that to you. Like, what?
I'd pretty much be like, okay, cool, peace out.
Like that SpongeBob meme where he just melts.
Yeah. Yeah.
But anyway, this was kind of the start of John really starting to act weird.
Many nights, John would just not return home from work. Then the next day, in the early morning hours, he'd show up saying he had been working late.
And I get that John had a lot going on with his business, but Rosie, you know that you wouldn't buy this.
No.
If I told you, right after getting intimate, if I told you I was never going to have sex with you again, and then I am not showing up until early morning next day, obviously there's something more going on here.
One night when John hadn't returned home, Carol heard a commotion outside near the garage and looked out to see John with a teenage boy walking into the garage. This happened multiple times, so Carol decided to investigate the garage when she had a chance.
And what she found in there was really disturbing. And this next part reminds me of that movie we watched not too long ago, A Good Marriage.
That's
remember?
the book I just read.
Really?
Yeah.
Well, it's also the name of that movie with...
Oh, no, I read The Perfect Marriage.
Oh, there's so many with similar titles. But anyway, remember that movie?
Yeah.
Where she goes in the garage and finds his secret stash?
Yeah. In the garage, Carol found a collection of gay pornography. This confirmed her suspicions about what John was doing with the teenage boys he brought into the garage.
But then she made another, even more shocking discovery.
Inside the house, she discovered a hidden collection of men's wallets with their IDs.
Can you imagine finding that?
Oof.
There's no scenario that I can think of where this could possibly not mean something terrible. Mm-hmm. Either your husband's a thief, which would be the hopeful option, or he's a murderer. I can't imagine making this discovery.
But when Carol confronted John about this, he got angry and informed her that it was none of her business. Things got tense within the marriage after that, and in October of 1975, they had a big fight after John blew up on her for making a mistake while balancing the checkbook. And this led to Carol asking for a divorce.
Thank goodness we have electronic banking now. But John agreed to this divorce, and she actually lived in the house for another 4 months after this. It takes time. She wasn't used to having to pay her own rent and stuff, so it took 4 months for her to move out into an apartment with her daughters in February of 1976.
Oof.
Which...
February.
Yeah, exactly. In Chicago, it's a terrible time to move. It's like the coldest month of the year. But on March 2nd, she was out and the divorce was finalized. So now he was on his own in the house.
Right. Because of his experience running PDM, Gacy was given a supervisor job for PE systems in March of 1977. This was a firm specializing in remodeling drugstores, but he continued to run PDM as well, which led to a lot of travel for work.
And once again, John found himself in a position of power over a workforce consisting mostly of high school students and young men. And just like before, he used this power to take advantage of them.
Whenever Gacy would do a favor for an employee, from lending a vehicle to financial assistance or promotions, he would often ask for sexual favors in return, as he held the favor over their head.
So, obvious abuse of power, but apparently, if his employees weren't as submissive as he wanted them to be, he could also become threatening.
It's said that he would talk about the guns he owned, and once he said to an employee, "Do you know how easy it would be to get one of my guns and kill you? And how easy it would be to get rid of the body?"
Which is terrifying. He said this from a place of experience because at this point, he knew he could do it. This was into the time that he was committing murders. But despite what he was up to at this time, John maintained a good face even on the political scene. He offered up free labor from his employees to clean the Democratic Party headquarters.
He just offered up the free labor?
Well, I'm sure he paid his employees.
Oh, okay, I
but
see what you're saying.
He didn't charge them.
He was rewarded for this by being appointed to serve on the Norwood Park Township Street Lighting Committee. What a privilege. And eventually became precinct captain once again. In 1975, Gacy also became the director of Chicago's annual Polish Constitution Day Parade, which he supervised yearly from 1975 to 1978.
This guy loved his annual events.
On May 6, 1978, he was even photographed with the First Lady of the United States at the time, Rosalind Carter, President Jimmy Carter's wife. How does this guy do this?
Right? He was weaseling his way into some very exclusive social circles by keeping up his appearances, even while committing these horrible crimes.
I've heard it's really hard to get into street lighting committees.
Yeah, very hard. They're even more stringent than the Secret Service.
Or the Jokey or Jolly Joker Clown Club.
Yeah. But to put that in perspective, he was at this event with the First Lady 6 years after his first confirmed murder.
Wow.
So again, not just blending in, but standing out as the opposite of what he was. It turns out, in retrospect, this event became an embarrassment to the U.S. Secret Service because at this event, he had been given an S-pin, meaning a person who had been directly given special clearance. Which is really odd given his existing criminal record.
That was sealed.
Yeah, just 8 years earlier, he was in prison. And now he was given special clearance to be in person with the U.S. president. It is embarrassing for the Secret Service.
Yeah, it is.
But we've talked about what was going on in his personal life during the 70s. Now we're going to go back and talk about the non-murder related crimes. And then next week we're going to go into more detail about the murders themselves. But let's go back to 1973. This was just a year after he got married and went full-time into his own business, his second marriage. Once again, it seems like everything is going great for John. He's finally in a good place in life, and he can make up for the mistakes he made with his first family. But no, he squandered that opportunity. So what happened in 1973?
That year, John purchased a property in Florida for his business, and he planned to travel down there to check it out. But he offered to take one of his teenage employees with him on the trip.
as a teenager, being able to travel from Chicago to Florida for work would sound pretty dope. He bought the property for his business. He probably was like, I need you to come help me inspect this property.
Mm-hmm.
Because they worked in construction. They were probably going to flip a house or something like that. So the kid, I would imagine, would probably be pretty excited about it. I mean, you'd love to travel to Florida for work, wouldn't you?
But I can never imagine thinking, like, as a teenager at my teenage jobs, like, oh, yeah, going down with the manager of PacSun sounds like a great idea.
Well,
like,
I feel like going to inspect a new property is a lot different than whatever thing PacSun would have you travel for.
I know. But on the first night that they were there, staying in their shared hotel room, Gacy raped this boy. Oh, this is like really frustrating and hard to, when you really think about it, because first of all, why would they be sharing in a hotel room?
I guess you could justify it by saying they could only afford one room, but he needed 2 guys for the job or something. Can you imagine how you'd feel in that situation? This is your boss. He's giving you a job where you can travel to different places, and then he does this to you. I can only imagine it would be really frustrating. And based on what happened next, it seems like it was.
Once the two returned to Chicago, while Gacy was in his yard, the teenage boy showed up to his house and beat him up. Okay, good.
Yeah, but I don't know if the kid ever did say anything, like you were just saying. I'd say this beating was justified, but, there was then and still is a huge stigma about, men being victims of sexual abuse, because there's a stigma that you need to be tough, and it's hard for men to come forward and admit that they've been taken advantage of this way. Mm-hmm. And I know it's hard for women too, but I don't know if he ever did report what happened. I think John might have volunteered this information later.
Gacy's wife had seen the attack, but he told her that he was attacked for refusing to pay the boy for poor quality work.
So, lying to his wife again. But now let's jump forward to May of 1975. And this is the year when he joined the clown club, and he told his wife he was done having sex with her and was sneaking boys into the garage.
That month, Gacy hired a 15-year-old boy named Anthony Antonucci. Is that how I say that?
Yeah, Antonucci, I would guess.
2 months later, in July of 1975, Gacy went over to Anthony's home to hang out. They drank a bottle of wine together while watching a stag film. Then Gacy pounced on Anthony, wrestling him to the floor and cuffing his hands behind his back. Once the boy was cuffed, Gacy left the room for some reason. But Gacy didn't put the cuffs on correctly, so they were a bit loose, and Anthony was able to wiggle one of his arms free.
Now, Gacy picked the wrong kid to do this to. It turns out Anthony was a wrestler on the high school team.
When Gacy returned to the room, Anthony pounced on him and wrestled him to the floor, taking the key to the handcuffs and cuffing Gacy behind his back.
So, that was a bit of an oopsie for John Wayne Gacy here. This time, the cuffs were on correctly. And, John Wayne Gacy is a big dude. There's no way he was going to be able to stand up with his hands cuffed behind his back when he's laying on his stomach on the floor.
Mm-hmm.
Now, at first, he was pissed and yelling at the kid. But when it sunk in that he was the one in the vulnerable position, he calmed down, and then he began to beg.
He promised that if Anthony removed the cuffs, he would leave. So he did. What?
I know. It shows, Anthony was a forgiving, decent kid, I guess. He had this man who tried to subdue and rape him, all cuffed up. And rather than attacking him or getting him arrested, he just let him walk free, which is true mercy, but it would allow for Gacy to try this again using this particular time as a learning experience.
Yeah, I'm sure it was just the immaturity. He's a teenage boy. He got hired by this guy. Mm-hmm. He doesn't want to lose his job. He's freaked out. He doesn't know what to do, and he feels like he'll be embarrassed by his friends and family if he tells them.
Yeah, well said.
The next year, on July 26, 1976, 4 months after finalizing his divorce, John picked up an 18-year-old hitchhiker named David Cram. On the spot, John offered him a job at PDM, And that evening, David started working for him.
And John and David got really close really quick, and on August 21st, 1976, David moved in with John.
The next day was David's 19th birthday, and John dressed up as Pogo, and the two of them started drinking. Once they were both drunk, John convinced David to put on handcuffs with his arms in front of him. Then suddenly, Gacy grabbed the cuff chain and swung David around, telling him that he intended to rape him. But David Cram was repulsed and kicked Gacy in the face to get away. Then he took the key and freed himself from the cuffs.
But despite this, David Cram apparently had nowhere else to go at this time. And this is something we'll talk about later, how a lot of John's victims, they were lonely people who didn't have anywhere to fall back.
They were relying on him.
Yeah. And there were also people who, if they went missing, no one would notice. But despite this event, David kept living with Gacy.
Ugh.
And a month later, there was another weird event where Gacy stood outside David's bedroom door and uttered some creepy words.
Really quick, though, this event, if you keep thinking about him being in a clown suit the whole time, ew, it's so ick.
A big onesie.
How terrifying.
Yeah.
So these creepy words that he uttered, he said, "Dave, you really don't know who I am. Maybe it would be good if you give me what I want." And again, he tried to rape David. But again, David made it clear he wasn't interested, so Gacy left the room saying, "You ain't no fun."
Ugh. It's like that shriveled old pervert from Family Guy.
Ugh. Finally, on October 5th, 1976, David moved out of that house and quit his job at PDM, fed up with Gacy's abuse. But it didn't take long for Gacy to convince another young employee to take the offer of free lodging. 18-year-old Michael Rossi moved in that same month. Michael had worked for PDM since May of that year, and he also dressed up as Patches the Clown to assist Gacy with his clown jobs. But he also moved out in April of 1977, so that didn't last long.
Now that's all we know about for his non-murder related crimes. So now it's time to start talking about a little bit as a primer for next week.
During the 1970s, Gacy took the lives of at least 33 young men and boys. 26 of them had been buried in the crawl space beneath his house.
So next week we'll go into more detail about the individual victims and what's available about them. But we're going to finish this episode up by talking about how all of this came out eventually. Because here we have this guy who appeared to be a model citizen, somehow had a secret record,
Right.
a criminal record that no one knew about. So what happened in December of 1978?
On December 11th, a 15-year-old boy named Robert Peist was at the Nissan pharmacy where he worked in Des Plaines, Illinois. John Wayne Gacy showed up that day to speak to the store owner about a potential remodeling job. Robert overheard Gacy saying that he hired teenage boys at a starting wage of $5 an hour, which caught his attention because it was almost double what he was making at the pharmacy. Wow. Gacy and Robert spoke briefly, and Gacy offered to meet up with the boy at 9 p.m. when his shift ended to discuss the job opportunity.
There's a lot of inflation since then.
Yeah. Robert's mother arrived at the end of his shift to pick him up.
Now, this was actually his mother's birthday, and his family was waiting at home for him to celebrate it together. But Robert asked his mom to wait for a bit, saying that some contractor wants to talk to him about a job. On the outside, it seems like an exciting opportunity for a 15-year-old kid to make double what he was making. But, Robert left his mom there waiting, promising to return shortly, but he never did.
She was unable to find her son at the pharmacy and frantically drove home to call the police and file a missing persons report.
Look, can you imagine the panic? Because you're expecting your 15-year-old son to return in a couple of minutes. He just made it sound like, I'll be right back. But then a lot of time passes and you're not able to find him anywhere where you thought he was. It's just so sad that this would happen on her birthday, putting a gloomy cloud over that day for the rest of her life.
When the investigation started, police interviewed Robert's manager at the pharmacy, who pointed them in the direction of John Wayne Gacy, since he was the contractor who was there that day. Lieutenant Joseph Kozenjak decided to look into Gacy more closely, and through a basic background check, discovered the history of Gacy's prison sentence for sodomy on a 15-year-old boy, and that he even had an outstanding battery charge against him in Chicago.
And this man passed a Secret Service screening. Okie doke.
Right?
But finally, someone who cared was starting to look into Gacy's past more thoroughly.
Along with 2 other officers, the detective visited Gacy's home to talk to him. He gave them the runaround with their questions, and when they asked him to come down to the station for further questioning, he told them that his uncle had just died, so he couldn't do it at the moment. And he pushed them out saying, "You guys are very rude. Don't you have any respect for the dead?"
So they left, but Gacy chose a pretty odd time to fulfill their wishes. The next morning at 3:20 a.m., he arrived at the station. He was all covered in mud. When they asked him why, he claimed he had been in a car accident, which I don't see the correlation there. I guess he got dirty trying to dig his car out of the mud after the accident. But
That's weird.
A car accident doesn't typically cause you to get covered in mud.
Right. Again, he denied any involvement in the disappearance of Robert Piest. They asked him why he returned to the pharmacy that evening, and he said he'd gotten a call from the owner that he'd left his appointment book at the store. But they'd already talked to the store owner, who denied calling Gacy. That was a dumb thing to say. That could be proven wrong so fast.
Yeah, so the detectives had a bad feeling about Gacy, as they should, and feared that he was holding the 15-year-old boy against his will in his home. And so on December 13th, 2 days later, they executed a search warrant.
They found several suspicious items during the search, including several police badges, a 6mm pistol, and a syringe with a hypodermic needle attached to it. They also found handcuffs, books on homosexuality and pederasty, which is a specific word for sexual activity between a grown man and a young boy.
It's pederasty.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Oh, that's fine.
They also found an 18-inch dildo and amyl nitrate capsules.
Amyl nitrate is a depressant that slows down the brain's communication with the rest of the body.
Whoa, so like roofies, kind of?
Kinda.
Where would you get that?
That's a good question. But that wasn't all.
They also found a 39-inch 2x4 with 2 holes drilled in each end, several driver's licenses, and bottles of Valium, a sedative, and atropine, which is a nervous system blocker.
Yeah, so basically he has a ton of drugs for taking away people's control over their own bodies.
They also found clothes in the home that were way too small to fit Gacy, including a blue parka and underwear. They also found a class ring, but it was from the class of 1975, meaning someone who had just graduated 3 years ago.
So clearly John shouldn't have that.
And they also found a receipt from the Nissan pharmacy in the trash next to the 36-inch piece of nylon rope.
So I'd say all this stuff combined is pretty much a smoking gun, but there was one crucial thing they weren't able to find. Robert Piest was nowhere to be seen. They had no idea where he was.
After this, they really felt suspicious of Gacy, so they began 24-hour surveillance of him. The day after they started, they received another call from Michael Rossi, who informed them of some more crucial details. A PDM employee named Charles Hatula had been found in the Illinois River earlier that year dead. Another one named Gregory Godzik had been gone missing.
I remember Rossi was the one who had lived with Gacy for a span of time and also worked at PDM. So he noticed when these people went missing or were found. Like we mentioned earlier, I don't think they had many other people that were keeping track of them.
On December 15th, investigators discovered that victim of Gacy's battery charge, Jeffrey Rignall. He had been lured into the car, chloroformed, raped, and tortured before being dumped off on the side of the road in Lincoln Park. Jeffrey suffered severe burns to his chest and face, as well as rectal bleeding.
So that was some sick, sadistic torture that he endured. And yet, this charge was just sitting there with nothing being done about it. What a failure of the legal system in that instance.
More and more disappearances of people close to Gacy started coming to the light for the investigators. And Gacy became more and more chummy with the police watching him, inviting them to eat meals with him and have drinks with him. Gross.
Yeah, so his game hadn't changed much, still trying to create this illusion of being this charming, charismatic, great guy.
But by December 18th, Gacy was wearing down and feeling stressed out, as it became more and more obvious that he wasn't going to get away with his secrets for much longer. He stopped shaving like he typically did and began drinking more heavily than usual. He even began preparing a $750,000 civil suit against the police department for harassment, demanding that they stop their surveillance.
It's a dumb move. On that same day, they traced that serial number from the receipt they found, and it was traced to 17-year-old Kim Byers. She worked with Robert at the pharmacy, and she told investigators that she had borrowed the parka from Robert for a bit to shield herself from the cold when she went outside, but that she put the receipt in the pocket of his parka before giving it back to him. So...
Well, there is the smoking gun, like you said before.
Yeah, exactly.
That same evening, they spoke to Rossi, who had previously lived with Gacy, and he told them that in the summer of 1977, Gacy asked him to spread 10 bags of lime in the crawl space under Gacy's house. Oh boy.
Yeah, and that's not lime as in what you put in beer. It's lime for soil, which is very corrosive, and it also makes the soil better quality, so it's better at decomposing organic material.
On December 19th, as investigators got this evidence ready to apply for a second search warrant, Gacy's lawyers served them the civil suit. The hearing for that was scheduled for December 22nd.
What a waste of time that was.
With his suit filed, Gacy was feeling confident again and invited the surveillance detectives into his house again. But the investigators continued to collect an overwhelming amount of evidence against him.
And we'll go into more detail about that next week. But under this mounting pressure, again, Gacy began to crack.
On the evening of December 20th, 1978, Gacy showed up to his lawyer's office to discuss the progress of the civil suit. When he showed up, he was disheveled and immediately asked for a drink. The lawyer got a bottle of whiskey from his car and they had some drinks. On the desk, Gacy saw a copy of the Daily Herald on his lawyer's desk. He picked it up and noticed the front page article covering the disappearance, and the headline read, "This boy is dead. He's in a river."
So this was triggering for John Wayne Gacy. He was already under the influence of alcohol, but this is when he really started to get wasted, and the realization that his actions were going to catch up with him eventually was really taking over him. He actually began to explain to his lawyers that he had, quote, been the judge, jury, and executioner of many, many people.
Oof.
And that now he wanted to be the same for himself.
He went on to confess to them that he'd buried most of them in his crawl space, and the 5 others he'd put in the Des Plaines River. But he quickly denigrated the status of these victims, dismissing them as, quote, male prostitutes, hustlers, and liars.
So even while confessing to these crimes, he's qualifying them by saying that his victims were worth less because, in his eyes, they were less important members of society, I guess. Obviously, this is a horrible thing to say, but sadly, he did get away with his crimes for a lot longer than he should have, because he did target people that were desperate and had no one else to turn to. People who wouldn't be noticed if they went missing. Mm-hmm. Sometimes referred to as the less dead, because, people just don't report it. And the reason Gacy did get on the radar of the police here is because his last victim was someone from a loving family. I mean, they were sitting there waiting to celebrate his mother's birthday with him when he disappeared. Mm-hmm. And his mother was waiting for him. So I feel like that's the only reason this stopped when it did.
Gacy fell asleep during this ranting confession because he had gotten so wasted. When he awoke the next morning, Gacy's lawyer informed him about the confession he'd made. And he just shook his head saying, "Well, I can't think about this right now. I've got things to do." And he left to go to work.
But instead of going to work, he had another change of plans.
He drove to a gas station, still under police surveillance, where he got gas, and while his car was being filled, handed a small bag of weed over to the gas station attendant filling his car, saying, "The end is coming for me. These guys are going to kill me."
He's so self-centered here. There's no remorse, no taking responsibility for his crimes. It's just about himself and how it's affecting him. That, the police are just doing their job in this situation because you killed 33 people. It's weird. But it's obvious that at this point, Gacy was spiraling.
After this, he drove to his friend and fellow contractor Ronald Rhodes' house. He got out of his car and gave Rhodes a hug before bursting into tears. He went on to say, "I've been a bad boy. I killed 30 people, give or take a few." Yuck.
Can you imagine the shock Ronald Rhodes had?
Give or take a few? Are you serious?
Again, cheapening the value of their lives. But again, after this, Gacy drove off and he headed to David Cram's home to meet up with him and Michael Rossi. Now, these are the two men who had lived with him in the past.
The surveillance officers noticed that as he drove to Cram's house, Gacy held a rosary to his chin, apparently praying as he drove.
And that's where we'll pick back up next week to finish this crazy story and talk about what we know of each murder. But, this guy is so annoying. In our first episode, I did feel a little bit bad about his childhood.
If it's true, what? I don't believe anything he says.
I guess, yeah. But, it was backed up by his mother and sisters.
Oh, yeah.
So, I do think there's truth to it. I think that this definitely shows how harmful child abuse can be. Mm-hmm. Because he used it to justify this. Obviously, a lot of people can recover and not hurt anyone else. Mm-hmm. But it can also be very damaging.
Right.
What do you think, Rosie?
Yeah, I know there's damage, but no matter what, that doesn't give you any type of past. Any of this.
Exactly. Whew. That's a heavy one.
Yeah. It's a lot of information to take in.
I know. My brain is fried.
Same.
Just after researching this, now it's super fried.
Mm-hmm. Should we do this review quick?
Yeah.
It's entitled "New Listener Loving It So Far." It's from Leah Barry. It says, "It's hard to find a podcast about true crime these days that don't have a comedic edge. While I do enjoy some of those, I really, really like the feel of this podcast. The voice of the victim is the perfect name for this podcast, as the sole focus is on the victim. The research is very obviously well done, and I just really enjoy the tone of this podcast. You can tell Ryan and Rosie really feel for these victims and their families. Keep it up. You got a lifetime listener here for sure. Update. So I'm completely caught up on this podcast now, and I'm sad I have no more episodes to binge. I look forward to the new episodes. I'll probably go back and listen to some again. Thanks again, Ryan and Rosie. It's been cool seeing how much your podcast has upgraded from the time you started. From research to confidence, you both have grown so much in your podcasting."
Thank you so much. Yeah, I do remember reading the first half of this a long time ago, but thank you for the update.
Yeah. I'm glad it's a positive update.
Yeah, it's funny she says that about the tone of the podcast because just today we got an email from some random person saying that we put them to sleep and they're unsubscribing. And we're like, okay, cool.
Thanks.
So we're glad that you awesome listeners who come back every week do enjoy our tone.
Right. It is.
I mean,
very nice.
It's hard to be like really expressive when we're talking about these kind of things. So that said, that's where we'll wrap it up. If this is your first time here, be sure you subscribe to the podcast on whatever you're listening to. We always forget to do this, so I'm just trying to throw it in here. We're on Instagram at VOV Podcast. Again, you can email us your listener stories at vovlistenerstories. And even if you just want to get in contact with us, that's probably going to be better than our main email.
Yeah, definitely.
vovpodcast@gmail.com, which, I mean, it's still open, but it is what it is. And Facebook, Voice of the Victim Support System. And of course, we're on Patreon. If you are interested in supporting us, there's 22 episodes over there that aren't in our main feed.
They're cool. They're bizarre ones, like a little more obscure.
Yeah. And a lot of them, I think our last 12 or so have been historically based cases. So
my favorite one was the government testing.
Oh, yeah.
From the 30s, was it? I think
50s.
So crazy.
Yeah,
that was wild.
So go check that out over there. That was actually like a sister episode to one in our main feed about Esther Schreier.
Yeah.
But yeah, anyway, thank you for listening, and we'll talk to you next week.
All right, bye guys.